Okay, so when we talk about intimacy, I thought this chart was a helpful one because, you've got up in the top left corner, you've got like this yourself and you've got some other person and there's no overlap, no intimacy with that person. And then you see progressing off to the right, more and more overlap between the self and the other, till in the lower right, they're virtually completely overlapping. That bottom right one is good representation of like let's say the child, the maybe under 5 year old child is the self, and let's say the mom is the other. There's a lot of overlap between the child's sense of self and how much they've internalized their mother. That's probably not super healthy for us in romantic relationships to have that degree of overlap between ourself and the other member of our romantic partnership, or our friend, or our boss, right? Like these should be getting even more and more separate. You and your boss, you probably have at least a little bit of overlap because you share an employment place, and you at least like that kind of scenario, or you wouldn't be working there. Like there's a little overlap of shared stuff, but it should not be on top of each other. How weird would that be to be sharing that much overlap with your boss? So you can kind of see how some kinds of relationships, maybe more overlap makes sense. Other kinds of relationships, less overlap makes more sense, right? So let's see if I can move forward here. So when we talk about intimacy, if we look at friendships, we find that in early adulthood, we have our biggest, most supportive networks of our lifetime. Early adulthood, it depends on who you talk to, but probably starting around age 18 and then probably ending around age 40. So it could vary. Some people might say, more like 30, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that, during the time when people probably need the most support, coincidentally, they tend to have the most support on average. When we look at a nice old theory that probably you've been exposed to before, Erikson's 8 stages of development, early adulthood is the time when we're trying to form intimate bonds. Back in adolescence, we had hopefully figured out who we are and established our identity. Maybe we're still working on it a little bit as we're into our 20s, but we start turning our attention to that intimacy goal, that conflict between, will I form an intimate relationship or will I stay in isolation? One of the things that you'll notice is that if you successfully resolve the intimacy conflict, according to Erikson, you develop the ability to love someone else. Up until, throughout childhood, Erikson's 8 stages were all focused on just developing the person's own sense of self and how they feel about themselves. Starting with adolescence, you are really solidifying your sense of self, but the virtue that you can develop is fidelity or loyalty to someone else. That sets you up to be able to actually start loving someone, because if you can be loyal to someone else, you can actually be a true love person. You can actually love that friend. You can, because you have that ability to be loyal to them. You have the ability to recognize loyalty also. And so now you can be more open and more embracing of the relationship, the friendship, or the romantic relationship. So that's what Erikson says, is that during young adulthood is when you're forming these intimate relationships. And so it's not surprising that young adulthood is when we've got friends that we can really rely on and that we really feel warmly towards. That we really can start to develop feelings of friendly love, right? Now, there are some gender differences or sex differences that we see in friendships. Male friendships tend to center on activities. They center on giving and returning favor, focus on the utilization of expertise. Maybe I have a friend who's, a history buff, and I can rely on him for information about the Civil War. Or maybe I have a friend who's a woodworker and he can help me with this carpentry thing that I want to do around the house, or these kinds of things. So you'll actually, the theme overarchingly is really behaviors, engaging in certain behaviors together. Whereas female friendships are much more focused on, emotional kinds of cognitive things, like sharing secrets, providing support, also doing favors. I'll grant you that females tend to give and receive favors also, but you can kind of see a difference in the focus of friendships. Notice in these pictures, now of course these are models, so they were told to pretend like you're out with your friends having a drink. Okay, so first off, they put the males having beer and the females having wine. So already we're in like stereotype world. But notice that the males are sort of sitting shoulder to shoulder with each other, and they're they're cheersing just like the females are, but their cheers is looking a little different, isn't it? Whereas the females are tending to, with the exception of one who's looking over her shoulder to look at the camera, the females are more face to face. In fact, one of the things that researchers will say is that females are more stomach to stomach and males are more shoulder to shoulder in their friendship relationships. And so that's a good way to characterize the difference between the sexes with regard to friendships. Females tend to look at each other in the eye. Females tend to intimately talk about things, whereas males might disclose something while they're doing something, not really looking at their friend, sort of they feel safer if it's not a face-to-face look you in the eye situation. This is within sex friendship. So when it's all males or it's all females, it's a little bit different if you get into mixed sex setups where people are friends with people of the other sex. So I thought I'd share with you some communication information. I think this is important when managing any kind of love relationship, ranging from friendships to it could even be your boss or a love relationship of romantic proportions. There are different ways to communicate, and so I thought I'd share with you, of course, something that you've probably learned as a psychology student, which is you might have learned active listening as the title for it. I'm using the term validating. Here we are facing each other, we're looking each other in the eye, and the listener is nodding maybe to encourage the speaker, or maybe giving little almost nonverbal responses that are vocal. Oh, yes, like trying to encourage the person to keep going, or to indicate I understand what you're saying, things like that. That's validating. That's the type that we all hear is the best way to communicate. But is it? Is it always, in every circumstance, the best way to communicate? Is it the only healthy way to communicate? No, it's not. There's also what you might call a volatile communication pattern. Here we have two guys talking to each other about something, and they look like maybe their voices are raised, right? Maybe they are getting frustrated because the other one doesn't seem to be understanding. And so maybe they're having to say it a little bit more firmly, a little louder. That's what we would call a volatile approach. Volatile is perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with voices getting raised. There's nothing wrong with, one of my favorite communication strategies is a person who's gotten frustrated, so they start clapping their hands in time to what they're saying. I always love that one. Personally, I find it infuriating, but I have done it. So, okay. So with the volatile style, it's a perfectly fine style as long as everybody knows that the raised voices don't mean anything antagonistic or threatening, right? It's not that this is the first step in it escalating into maybe something physical or something like that. As long as everybody knows that, oh yeah, we get louder, but it's because we get a little bit deaf while we're supposed to be having this conversation. As long as everybody knows that this is just the style of conversation, then it's fine. I know that I came from a family that didn't, we did a lot more of the validating style, and I married into a family that has much more of the volatile style. And it was a little bit difficult to get used to, honestly. Not because I had been, trained in psychology or something, but because it felt to me like step one in like it's going to be a fight kind of thing, as opposed to it's just people talking loud. And so there's a little bit of that can be a miscommunication sometimes, right? Where if you don't understand the intention behind this volatility, you might misinterpret it as something worse. And then, of course, I have to give the disclaimer. If it is a prelude to something worse, then certainly I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who just raise their voices because that's how they talk. Maybe gesture a lot too. Sometimes people don't like it when the other person gestures a lot, but sometimes people just talk a lot with their hands. Then there's the conflict avoiding. And again, you might have heard that that's like universally a bad thing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you're avoiding talking about things because you don't want to deal with them ever. You're just hoping that it'll go away if everybody ignores it. That's not communication at all, because you're just avoiding it and trying to hope it'll just go away. That's not what we're talking about. Conflict avoiding can be, you know what? It seems like we're getting a little heated. Our voices are getting raised and it's making us nervous. And so, you know what? Let's take a break. Let's resume. There are some people who literally want, in the middle of an argument, to leave the room and go take a walk. And then when they come back, they've sort of cleared their head and now they can actually speak in, a kinder way, or they can understand better. I personally don't understand that because I can't walk away in the middle. I'm like, we've got to understand each other or else I can't even. So to me, that would be hard to have somebody say, I need to go take a walk and I'm just left here for 20 minutes waiting for you to clear your head. Like, that would make me very uncomfortable. I'd rather have a raised voice conversation than that, right? So we all have our styles and we're allowed to have our styles. But if you see that you're maybe getting volatile and in the bad way, it would make a lot of sense. Let's take a break. Let's table this for right now before anybody says anything that we can't take back. And let's resume in 20 minutes, or let's talk about it again tomorrow, or something like that. That's avoiding conflict in a healthy way, actually, right? That's actually avoiding something that could become harmful. And so that kind of conflict avoiding is good. There's another kind of conflict avoiding that's healthy, and that is picking your battles, right? It's not that I don't want to bring it up because it's going to become a whole big thing and I don't want to talk about it, so I'm just going to let it go and hope it never happens again. Like, that's not what I mean. I mean something like, is this really worth potentially having an argument over because I chose to bring this up? Is it really worth it? A lot of times parents follow the pick your battles mentality where they're like, maybe I don't have to pick on every single little thing my child does wrong. Maybe I should pick my battles for the things that really matter. I'm only going to talk about the things that really matter. And that's a type of conflict avoidance. Like, why am I picking fights all the time when it doesn't really, in the scheme of things, matter? And so if you are picking your battles, if you are tabling a conversation that might be going in a very bad way, and then you do make a promise and follow through and do actually resume the conversation, those are healthy ways to avoid conflict. Unhealthy conflict avoidance is more of a denial kind of thing, where we're just going to, hopefully when we wake up in the morning, everyone will have amnesia for what happened and we never have to talk about this again. That's not healthy. So hopefully you're seeing the good and the bad, and that, there's not one correct style. In relationships, the style that works for you is the style that works for you. The way that you can get heard, or the way that you can get your point across, or the way that you can understand the other person's perspective, that's what works and that's what matters. So that's what I wanted to emphasize about that. I want to transition into a whole other perspective, and that is the one that comes from John Gottman, who has studied relationships since the early 90s. Well, honestly, I think he did one big study of relationships, published it, and never published anything again, and now has just become super famous. I guess that's one way to go also. But he defined some communication warning signs that he called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and talk about that in the next video.